I had a great privilege of being able to work on this project, Makers, which was trying to sort of synopsize the last 40 years of the women's movement in the United States. I wanted to be a part of that project for political reasons. I felt like it was a story that wasn't told or known. I think it's been told more often than it's been heard. And it was a personal journey, one that I have connected to my entire life, but more so in my past sort of 20 years making my living as a professional activist, writer, and organizer. And also, when I get up and give talks often, they'll read my bio, which usually includes lists of books that I've written and organizations I'm affiliated with, and it rarely touches on the fact that I also played Division I soccer all through college, and that I've run 4 marathons. And I think that that is an important part of my biography. And when I was listening to Winslow talk about sports, sports is a global language, and you can travel around the world, and you can play soccer with kids on a beach in Ghana, you can go to a soccer game in France, and you are speaking a common language. And I know as a girl, for me, sports was so important because I got leadership skills that I wasn't always afforded off the playing field. I also learned about discrimination and segregation. I had to fight for the girls to have our own uniforms. We had to wear the boys' old uniforms. I had to also get along with people that I didn't really like because we had to be on a team together. And I think as a girl specifically, I had to get over some body image issues that I do think disproportionately affect girls in those coming-of-age years. But I also like this clip for political reasons, which is that it shows that so many people like Catherine come to feminism not because they were taught it or lectured into it, but because they were confronted with a moment where I could either say, as I think Winslow said, why or why not? And they often say, why not? What do I have to lose? I also think that so many people come to feminism not because they're so much trying to change the world for themselves, but they're trying to change the world for everybody. And Catherine's story really illuminates that she took that step. She didn't realize what a brave step she was taking. Anita Hill did the same thing. Sandra Day O'Connor, when she accepted to be the first woman on the Supreme Court. The history books are riddled with examples of that, where you act not because it's necessarily a choice you want to make, but you want other people to have more choices and more chances. I also like this clip because Catherine Switzer, the Boston Marathon's this Monday, so we'll have new numbers, but that was 45 years ago. Her time was 4 hours and 20 minutes. The top man that year, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Last year, 45 years later, top woman, 2:31, top man, 2:12. Women gained 1 hour plus, men barely 2 minutes, barely 3 minutes. So it points a little bit to, I think, what feminism has to prioritize, which is, in another generation, it was about access. Women weren't allowed, and once we were allowed, I think we've proven that we have a right to be in those spaces, and we have a right to be offered the same privileges that have been offered to everybody. It also points out a problem, which is that I think that when we're measuring change exclusively by how well women acclimate, or in Sheryl Sandberg's terms, how well women lean in to traditional positions of power, I'm not sure that we're going to get to that equal place. I'm not sure we're going to get to a 50-50. Does that mean men have succeeded and women have failed? I don't think so. I think what it means is that we need a new way of evaluating change. I was very optimistic when I was in college, and I thought if we just legislated it better, then we would have the change as a consequence. But you can create laws, but you can't create that same trickle down to human behavior. And so as much as we should have the laws out there to protect the equal pay laws, the anti-sexual harassment laws, the better sexual assault policies, we need those laws. We need to both believe that we're worthy of more, and we also need to create many forms in which people can succeed. There was a great, or not so great, piece in the New York Times yesterday talking about Phillips Andover and how they were changing their policies for head of school, and to try to, in an attempt to get more women, they were creating teams of leaders. So it could be pairs. They did that, and 2 men still won. But in the course of it, and this goes to something Alex was just talking about, many people said, why wouldn't you vote for a girl? And they said, oh, well, it's not that I won't vote for a girl, it's that he just has more natural leadership ability. He's just a better public speaker. He's just better at convincing people of things. It reminded me a couple weeks ago, I was out to dinner with a friend who's, a liberal Democrat, would probably vote for Hillary Clinton if it was put in front of him. But he said, I just think if she's going to seriously run, she has to get some some better voice training and some speaking training because her voice is just so shrill. And I hear that over and over again. And it goes back to Carol Gilligan, who in 1980 looked around her classrooms at Harvard, and she realized that as much as she had sort of been emboldened by a feminist movement and had fought for change, that she had been a victim of this as well. And when she would hear her male students ask a question, she heard it as more worthy. She heard it as more noble. And she heard women speaking in a personal place and didn't value that as much. And so she wrote this book very sort of sympathetically saying, we need a different conversation. And as much as I think the conversation has changed in the 30 plus years since that book came out, I still think that we are asking women to join a conversation that has already been set. And I think if we measure change in that way, we're only going to see so few women. And there was a Princeton leadership study a couple years ago. The current president of Princeton, a woman, got to campus, looked around, and was shocked at how few women there were in leadership positions. So they commissioned a couple-year study. They looked, and this was among the student body, looked at the leadership and realized that women were there, they just weren't in the top positions. Women were working on the school newspaper, student government, RAs, student activities, but rarely were they reaching that level of president. What people thought was women weren't given the opportunity, using the Andover example. Maybe if we create a co-team, it'll change the scenario. They interviewed a lot of the women who'd been in those second, third positions, and the women said, I don't want it. And it wasn't not wanting it because they didn't think they could do it. They didn't want it because they saw the head job as a figurehead role, and they wanted to really be giving their time and working really hard. And I like that study because I think it points out something that we've been scared to acknowledge, which is that being at the top doesn't mean that we don't want to be successful. Being at the top is very punishing for anybody, but I think particularly for women. As I think we learned in the last presidential election, a lot more people liked Hillary Clinton when she lost than when she was running. And I think women do better when they lose than when they win, because either we feel bad for them, we sympathetic for them, but I think we also aren't threatened by them when they lose. And that is a sad reality. When I started doing this work 20 years ago, I thought, oh, well, it's just that people don't know. They don't know that women are being sexually assaulted. 1 in 4 women are being sexually assaulted. They don't know that women are being paid less in major educational institutions, that women are being paid less. That I'm sure if we looked at the TEDTalks, that the only time they came close to having women be equally represented was when it was TED women, and then men weren't represented. And I thought, if I just give the numbers, if I just say it louder, people will hear me. Doing this work for 20 years, it doesn't matter. People don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that women need an opportunity and that women don't necessarily want to succeed in the same way men succeed. And it was Winslow, I think, who was talking about the change that is so personal, and that's something I really advocate for, because I think I initially thought that the legal change was the route to equality, and now I think it's the personal change that's the route to equality. And my bio today said that I was a mother, and I was shocked by that because I rarely identify myself as a mother, not because it's not something I'm proud of, but I don't do it because I worry that it belittles what I do professionally. Because if I'm known as a mother, I don't know where I've ever been where a man has been identified as a father. And Sheryl Sandberg, she talks very publicly about leaving work to be with her kids during the dinner time hours, the 5 to 7. She also talks about how she did it ever since she's had kids. She didn't talk about it publicly until the last 2 years. And I do think that we need better family leave policies. We need places, workplaces, education places where we're valuing that. But I think we also need to be brave enough to know that those choices don't have to mark us. They don't have to mean that we're belittled. And the way to get to that is, I think, to look at leadership through more of a female paradigm. And this is something that on the surface, we think it benefits women, but I actually think it's something that benefits everybody. Stuart Friedman, who works at the University of Pennsylvania, they have a center for work and life there, work-life balance. And he switched the name because it used to be called Work Family, but when they called it Work Family, they heard it as a women's issue. When they changed it to Work Life, many more men said, oh, I did want to get my pilot's license, and it'd be great to have Friday afternoons off. I've been training for the marathon, it'd be great to come in an hour later. It made it not a women's problem. And what we saw from that is that men can benefit too. And I think that when we say that we need feminism, people hear that as only advantaging women. And I hear it as it's going to advantage anybody, because the forces that work against women also work against men who don't fit into a very narrow paradigm. White, wealthy, masculine, jockey, good looking, it's the same, often wealthy, it's the same scenarios. So going to this other paradigm is something that can benefit everybody, not just women. And Alex mentioned war and looked at the sort of cost of war, and it was so interesting to sort of look at the situation in North Vietnam and then read the morning paper this morning and to see that we're still talking about this. And there was a moment in 2008 when Obama was first running, and I thought, oh, finally, when the Wall Street markets were crashing, I thought, finally, we're beginning to see this crack in masculinity. Wars aren't working, financial institutions are failing us, and we have a president who cries and who isn't ashamed to be home with family dinner, or a vice president, I guess, who cried, and a president who wasn't ashamed to be at home with his children for family dinner. And I think that that's what feminism is going to take. It's going to take less of us being dependent upon these forces that seem to be inevitable. It wasn't always the case that Wall Street was as booming as it is, but it's only booming for the 1%. It's not booming for the 99%. And we have given that power to those institutions. And so for feminism to progress into the next century, I think we have to continue to say to women, yes, you can do it, but we also have to say that the things we're putting our faith in aren't so great after all. And I think that that is a big risk. It's not only a risk because we're vulnerable to challenging institutions that many of us accept as a given, but we're also vulnerable because many of our lives are probably pretty cushy. When I look at a lot of women who are staying home from the traditional workforce, people will say, well, why don't you think they're doing that? It's like, because their lives are pretty good. And I think that social change, if we look back over the centuries, what we will see is that it's not comfortable. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna mean that we take risks that are both political and that are personal. But it's only through taking those risks that we will be able to create the change that we wanna see. When I was graduating from college, I did a project called Freedom Summer 92. It was a cross-country voter registration drive. And I thought I was undertaking this project because there were people being underserved in our country. And by that, I was specifically talking about non-white communities and poor communities. And I thought if I go into those communities and give them better access to voting, we'll end up with better elections, they'll end up with more leadership in politics, and the world will look differently. I thought I was doing it for them. Halfway through this project, I realized that if I live in a democracy that's not fulfilling its promise to democracy, that's about me. That's doing a disservice to me. And so the activism I thought that was on behalf of other people is really on behalf of me as well. And I think that that is something that Catherine Switzer realized. She wanted to run the marathon because she didn't think it was fun. What kept her going through that marathon is realizing that it was about other people, that the bold steps we take today are going to benefit people in the future to take even bolder steps. And just to end, going back to the metaphor of standing on the shoulders of giants and bringing it back to the concept of the deflating of the masculine in contrast to the empowerment of the feminine, I think that it's wonderful that we can build upon a legacy and we can stand on shoulders. But I think if we look at it through that paradigm, we're actually going to see a field of giants, not a pyramid of giants. Because what women want to do is they want to stand. They want everybody to benefit, not just the few people who can climb the ladder or climb the pyramid. And so what I invite all of you to do is to recognize your place in that field. You don't have to be the Catherine Switzers, you don't have to be the Barack Obamas, but each and every day you can do something where you can look at your life and say, I might have a great life, but who doesn't, and how can I help other people make the same choices that I've made? Thank you.